Today, I want to walk you through something that even experienced security teams struggle to explain clearly. Why organizations deploy multi-factor authentication and still experience account compromise, still experience breaches. This is not a beginner topic. This is not about one bad setting. This is about how security systems behave in the real world when technology, people, and organizations collide. If you have ever wondered how an environment can be MFA enabled and still fail catastrophically, this will make that clear. So let's start from first principles. Multi-factor authentication is based on a simple idea. Access should require more than one category of proof. Something you know, something you have, or something you are. When MFA is implemented correctly, it dramatically increases the cost of attack. Not by making attacks impossible, but by making them unreliable and noisy. Security controls do not eliminate risk, they reshape it. So when breaches happen, teams often ask the wrong question. They ask, was MFA enabled? That is a compliance question, not a security question. The real question is different. The real question is, under what conditions was MFA allowed to be bypassed? Because in every real organization, MFA is conditional, and conditions are where security weakens. In theory, MFA is binary, on or off. But in practice, MFA is selective. It applies to certain identities, certain applications, certain locations, certain protocols, and sometimes only at certain times. Each of those dimensions introduces exceptions, and exceptions are where attackers operate. To understand how MFA fails, you first have to understand where it quietly stops applying. Not everywhere. Just enough places to matter. In most organizations, MFA is designed around interactive users, people who log in through browsers, people who see prompts, people who can approve a push. But environments are not made only of people. They are made of identities, service accounts, application identities, background processes, automated jobs, and many of these identities were never designed to handle a second factor. So MFA is scoped, carefully, selectively. It might apply to human users, but not to service accounts. It might apply to browsers, but not to APIs. It might apply to modern protocols, but not to older ones still required for compatibility. None of this feels reckless. It feels practical, necessary, approved. But every place MFA stops applying creates a boundary, and boundaries are what attackers map. They don't ask where MFA exists, they ask where it doesn't. And once they understand that, the attack becomes a navigation problem, not a technical one. To understand this properly, you have to stop thinking in terms of users and start thinking in terms of identities. In modern environments, not all identities are treated equally. Some are human, some are technical, some are interactive, some are not. Human users are usually the most visible. They log in through browsers, they see prompts, they approve pushes. So MFA is designed around them. But many of the most powerful identities in an environment are not human at all. They are service accounts, application identities, integration credentials, background processes. These identities authenticate differently. They do not pause. They do not respond. They cannot approve a prompt. So MFA is often excluded. Sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly, sometimes because it's temporary, sometimes because it breaks the workflow, sometimes because we'll fix it later. But attackers understand this distinction very well. They know that service accounts often have long-lived credentials, broad permissions, limited monitoring, and weaker authentication requirements. So they don't start by attacking human users. They look for identities that are treated differently, identities that authenticate quietly, identities that blend in, identities that are trusted by default. This is why investigations often reveal something uncomfortable. The compromised identity was not misconfigured. It was behaving exactly as intended. It had access, it had credentials, and it was never required to perform a second factor. MFA didn't fail randomly. It failed where identity models were inconsistent, where some identities were hardened and others were quietly exempt. That inconsistency is what attackers exploit. Even when identities are scoped carefully, MFA is still enforced through specific paths. Not everywhere. Through particular protocols, through particular flows, through particular assumptions about how authentication occurs. Most MFA implementations are built around interactive authentication, browser-based logins, modern authentication libraries, redirects, prompts. But not all access moves through those paths. Some access happens over older protocols, some over service-to-service calls, some through APIs, some through tools designed long before MFA existed. These paths are not hidden. They are documented. They are known. They are often required for compatibility or integration. So exceptions are created. Selective enforcement, conditional exclusions, fallback paths. And attackers learn these paths very quickly. They test authentication the way water tests terrain, not by force, but by flow. They try different protocols, different endpoints, different authentication methods, until they find one that behaves differently. This is why credentials can be compromised and still be accepted without triggering MFA. Because the login did not go through a path where MFA was enforced, nothing was bypassed. Nothing was broken. The system responded exactly as designed. From a dashboard, everything still looks correct. MFA is enabled. Coverage appears complete. But underneath, there are paths that were never covered at all. And attackers don't need to defeat MFA. They only need to avoid it. Once attackers understand where MFA stops applying, their job becomes very simple. They are no longer trying to break controls. They are trying to choose paths. Attackers think in terms of probability, not skill, not sophistication. Probability. They ask one question repeatedly: where is authentication most likely to succeed? Not where it is strongest, but where it is inconsistent. They test identities that authenticate quietly. They test protocols that enforce differently. They test paths that look legitimate, because every failed attempt creates noise, and noise attracts attention. So attackers optimize for silence. They avoid interactive flows. They avoid prompts. They avoid challenges. They choose access that blends in, access that looks normal, access that matches expected behavior. This is why many compromises are only discovered later, not during authentication, but during impact, when data is accessed, when systems are modified, when business processes break. From the attacker's perspective, the breach did not begin with an exploit. It began with a decision to follow the path of least resistance, a path where MFA did not need to be defeated, only avoided. Once MFA has been avoided, nothing dramatic happens. There is no alert, no warning, no visible failure. From the system's perspective, authentication succeeded. An identity logged in, access was granted, everything behaved normally. That is what makes this phase dangerous, because the attacker is no longer bypassing controls, they are operating inside them. At this point, most attacker activity looks legitimate. Sessions are valid, tokens are valid, requests follow expected patterns. And because MFA was already avoided, it does not reappear. This is where lateral movement begins, not explosively, carefully, one system at a time, one permission at a time, often using access that already existed. Attackers don't rush here. They observe, they map, they learn which actions trigger attention and which ones do not. They move in ways that resemble normal behavior, because normal behavior is rarely challenged. This is why MFA does not stop a breach once the initial access is obtained. It has already done everything it was designed to do. It protected the door, but it does not follow every movement inside the building. By the time a breach is detected, the attacker is often several steps ahead, not because defenses failed suddenly, but because they worked exactly as scoped. And that is the part most organizations underestimate. At this point, a reasonable question comes up. If all of this is true, why don't dashboards show it? Why do reports still say MFA enabled? Why do audits still pass? The answer is simple. Dashboards measure presence, not coverage. They confirm that MFA exists, not where it stops applying. Compliance asks whether a control is enabled. Security asks how it behaves under pressure. Those are very different questions. Most reporting systems aggregate success. They do not surface asymmetry. They do not highlight which identities authenticate differently, which protocols enforce selectively, which paths were excluded for operational reasons. Because those details are inconvenient, they complicate the narrative. So organizations walk away with confidence, not because risk was removed, but because it was averaged out. The green dashboard feels reassuring, even when the gaps are still there. This is why MFA-related breaches often feel confusing in hindsight. Teams did not ignore security. They followed the model they were given. They trusted what was measured. And what was measured did not reflect reality. MFA is not broken, but it is not absolute. It is conditional, scoped, contextual, and unless those conditions are understood and challenged, they will continue to be exploited. Not because attackers are exceptional, but because systems behave exactly as designed.